Hi, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be here. Gina, thank you for those important remarks that contextualize the many problems that we're here to discuss. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here in this and to consider these problems and possible solutions to them with such a diverse audience who studies them closely and can offer nuanced and important insights. I spent most of my academic life studying the political and the social consequences of technology. This has a mind of its own and moved ahead before it was time for it to do so. I'm planning to talk about what AI can and cannot do for democracy. So let's begin. Can AI break democracy? No. Technologies have come and gone since times ancient, and democracy has stayed. But if we keep developing technology with democracy as an afterthought, we miss out on some real opportunities to make democracy stronger. The historian Melvin Kranzberg reminds us that technology is neither good nor bad nor neutral, and many of you who are in the business of studying technology may have heard this before. My favorite, it's one of Kranzberg's laws of technology. My favorite law is the last one. He makes the point that all history is relevant. The history of technology is the most relevant history. But neither good nor bad nor neutral. What is it exactly? Well, it's human-made, designed by humans, with all of our flaws. And this is important because we often design technology without being fully aware of our flaws, right? Most of us, we spend half our lives trying to figure out what our flaws are, and then if we're lucky enough to understand them, to discover them, trying to fix them. And then on top of that, we try to get technology to correct those flaws when we should know better. We should know that this is impossible. Technology has no business correcting our flaws. It's our own responsibility. AI comes in packages, big, small, all kinds of sizes, and what they all have in common is that they're powered by the internet. The internet is not a magical space. It cannot create something out of nothing. It cannot manifest democracy where democracy previously did not exist. It cannot altogether on its own destroy democracy. AI, like all net-based technology, will pluralize but not democratize. It will open up pathways to connection. These pathways, these avenues will connect democratically oriented people. They will also connect fascists. Nor will AI, models of AI, associated technology that supports AI and how it moves, how it traverses our everyday infoscapes. It does not extinguish social problems, nor does it create them. It does not create hate speech. It's not responsible for it. We humans are. But what it does do is it makes things more loud, more visible, more intense, and it amplifies. And when it amplifies, it does so on terms that are not equal. All voices are equal. Some voices are more equal than others online. Do AI-driven technologies, do AI models, modalities, do they break democracies? Do they influence elections? No, they do not tell us what to do. It doesn't work that way. We're not automatons yet. But they do tell us what to think about. You know, they prioritize, they organize our realities for them and how we internalize the events that are going on around us. And they tell us how to think about things. They give us a vocabulary that we use to describe the events that we're experiencing. And this is very important and influences how we perceive, how we understand the gravity of what we're seeing. So that curated newsfeed that you see that may be filled with disinformation and deep fakes and a little bit of drama and opinion and some correct information. What it does is it prioritizes and it frames like a lens. It draws in your attention and it directs your gaze. And in so doing, it distracts from many other important things that are happening, like the changing nature of war, as Gina explained. We're accustomed to thinking of war as a military enterprise, and it very well still is, but we're gradually moving to a texture of war that's going to take a very different shape. We're understanding, we're interpreting a lot of the things that are happening in the United States as well, as a variety of different things, but they, and generally speaking, as chaos everywhere. But really, what the news infoscape that we're dealing with is concealing is a very gradual, maybe actually gradual is not the word that I should be using, an accelerating dismantling of the process of democratic governance, the privatization of federal governance, the breaking up of a federation of states that's very powerful, and the eventual, I want to withhold from being, the prophet of things that are going to happen here, but it's quite likely that we'll see, if things keep moving in this direction, the breaking up of the Federation of the United States into individual states that then follow their own particular pursuits, depending on what those polities are interested in doing. But more time, we'll talk more about that later. Do AI-driven technologies make or suppress revolutions? No, but they intensify movements through serving as conduits of populism. They connect and they divide, and they do so in ways that accelerate polarization. And they enable acts of symbolic impact. And this is important. When I first wrote about revolutions and the digital, this was a very hopeful thing. Symbolic impact, symbolism helped repressed people imagine what it would be like to live in a regime that didn't oppress them. Now we've just sort of crossed over to the opposite end of the pendulum here. But this last point is worth emphasizing, because all too often we're swept up in the speed with which information moves, in the virality of it all. And we feel that we must take part in what's happening. We need to do something urgently, right away, even if it's something small, like clicking and sharing information. And this is something that we need to learn to master and handle more carefully. Because in an attention economy, which is what we live in, with a very strong capitalist land, in an attention economy, our attention is our power. Our gaze is our path to agency. We have to learn to use it wisely. Now, let me talk a little bit about populism and polarization. I mentioned before that AI, net-supported technologies do not create social problems, do not make them go away, but they do make them more visible. And in so doing, and for this reason, we feel them much more intensely. They often do so with conditions that are part of the DNA of democracy. So populism, we need to understand as a permanent condition of the kind of democracy that we have. We cannot have majority rule representative democracy without some sort of conduit for generating popular opinion. And that's what populism is. A political theorist, Ernesto Laclau, the theorist of populism, tells us that populism has its own logical progression. It employs open signifiers, and open signifiers are slogans, they're refrains, they're phrases that are very open to interpretation. They don't have any significant or potent meaning, and they're appealing precisely because of that. People can fill them with all kinds of meaning they want to. Politicians, public figures use open signifiers to unite publics. But open signifiers are not unique to any kind of ideology. They're unique to populism, they're unique to democracy, but we've seen public figures from the left, from the right, from the center, from the far left, from the extreme right utilize signifiers. So Brexit is a floating signifier. MAGA is a floating signifier, right? Vague enough to unite people, but all the people affiliating with it, filling it with meaning, they don't necessarily have all of too many ideological positions in common. Over to the other side, hope, change we can believe in, signifiers that Barack Obama was elected on, also open signifiers. AI, I want to put to you, is an open signifier. It means so many things and nothing at the same time at this point. Now, what do we do with that? Once we accept that populism is a permanent condition, a permanent virus of democracy, then we can develop technologies that can help us create remedies for that, that can help us imagine and create antibodies so that we start using technology as something other than a tool. We start to think of its medicinal purposes. Polarization. Studies show time and time again that all societies go through cycles of polarization where they polarize and then they gradually depolarize and then they polarize gradually again and so on and so forth. It's unavoidable. Once we accept polarization as part of the DNA of democracy, then we can use science to do a number of things. First of all, we can already use science to predict polarization, to have a sort of sense of when it's going to happen, how long it'll last, when it will end. And we might be able to use technology to create, say, polarization vaccines. And finally, when we get to that point, I would say we might be able to start to use technology not to correct things for us or generate scripts for us, but to help to engage our imagination so that we're able to think of ways to reinvent democracy. Let me talk a little bit about the work that I did in this book towards that. So a lot of people see the title for this book and they assume that I wrote it, I was inspired in dark times with the ascent of populism, and it's really quite the opposite. I was inspired to work on this book in a moment of optimism. I was observing Barack Obama and other politicians who seemed to me like they had come from the future. You know, they went into some sort of, time travel machine and they landed in the wrong era. They had all these great ideas, but they were caught up in just very stiff, very old structures of democracy that were just kind of keeping them from advancing their agendas, their wonderful ideas. And this is why I use here this installation from the late artist Virgil Abloh that says, "You're obviously in the wrong place," because that's what it felt like observing them. So that got me thinking, what if we have it all wrong? What if democracy, or at least this kind of democracy that we're practicing, is not it? What if there's something better out there and we just don't have the imaginative capacity to think about what it could be like? Something better that's better suited for our times, and something that technology can help us get to. Technology can help us access these additional civic stops that are part of our civic journey. And we can use technology to build out the pathways to these civic stops in the same way that we used railways to get us to places that we couldn't get to before. So I decided to do something different from what I had done previously. I usually ask people, how do they use technology in their everyday lives? I decided to not ask about technology at all, but to ask about democracy instead, and ask people, if democracy could be different, can you help me imagine what it would look like? I wanted to, what I did is I traveled the world and I struck up conversations with strangers. And obviously I couldn't accost strangers and say, this version of democracy is wrong. Let's imagine a different one. So I had these conversational openers. I asked them all the same three questions. What is democracy? What does it mean to be a citizen? And what would it take to make democracy better? And that's where I was hoping to get to that part of, let's imagine the other civic stops, what could follow democracies or something better, who said that, we're going to have this kind of democracy forever and ever. These are some of the places that I visited. And for some of the places that were in political turmoil, it wasn't safe for me to travel or safe for me to put people in the process of, give them the visibility of being interviewed about this. I visited refugee centers and spoke with them. I did 100 interviews. Here's an overview of some of the most striking quotes. Hussein from Afghanistan, democracy is different from politics. When he told me that, I felt like, I was hearing Hannah Arendt speaking, but he had never read or heard of Hannah Arendt. Olab from Afghanistan had left the country because he did not want to join the Taliban, and then the Taliban were threatening to kill him if he didn't join, or to and to harm his family. So he just simply disappeared. And I found him in a refugee rehabilitation center in Greece. We all want to be heard, but we must learn to listen to each other. Luis from Mexico City, this was my first interview, a taxi driver. On cover, it's democracy, but it does not feel like it. What did people tell me generally? First off, they were shy, which is common. They offered textbook definitions of democracy, and they would ask, is this right? Is this correct? And I said there's no right or wrong responses. So we got to talking, and what they would say, what it felt like is, like I was talking with people who were filled with nobility, had very noble intentions of being responsible citizens, but they felt trapped in a current version of democracy that seemed very dated. It almost felt like we have grown out of established paths to civic participation, and trying to go down these paths time and time again is a little bit like trying to fit into the clothes that we used to wear when we were teenagers, kind of this obsession that we all have to get into that pair of jeans, to capture that sense of youthfulness. Why? We did that. Let's move on to something new that's more fitting for where we are now. And I feel like the same applies to technologies. We have new technologies. We use them in very old ways. All right, so these are tropes of problems that I grouped that emerged as I was talking to my conversational companions. And these are all things that technology can help us through inventing ways, helping us invent ways that imagine a reality otherwise, a reality that gradually begins to contain smaller or greater levels of some of these things. The first one is quite obvious. We have strong capitalism, soft democracy. We need to reverse that. Yeah, like Gina, I was 6 months ago, I was at a point of greater optimism. Not so anymore, but resilient about doing this still, and about the necessity to do it. Micro-governance, citizens are very encouraged about those, about forms of governance that occur in community. They enhance trust, and technology can help us strengthen those bonds and create avenues, pathways of connecting them, channeling those pathways to meso and macro levels of governance, so that there are better connections between and better pathways for participation for citizens. Counting absence, okay? A government that's elected with only 50% participation of the electorate is not a majority rule government. It's not. I mean, there's no point of them in pretending that they got the majority vote or the popular vote. They didn't. They got the most vote of like the 50% of the people. So there's no reason for that arrogance, and there's no reason for us to permit them to have that arrogance. Long and short-term politics. This is a very simple thing that we do in our everyday lives. I don't understand why we don't demand it of our politicians. In our family planning, we have the short-term goals, we have the long-term goals. You know, a politician appears, and we look for things that have to do with vision, and we forget to employ criteria that ask politicians to distinguish very clearly between what is the long-term plan, what is the short-term plan, what are the specific steps. We're all asked to do this when we interview for jobs. Yet, you know, when we interview a prime minister or president for that position, all of a sudden, most important question, and the media play a big part in this, is, are they relatable? Can I have a beer with that person? What's wrong with you? Do you not have friends that you can go have beers with? Go have beers with them. Let the prime minister do their job. Beyond voting, yes, you know, voting is an important privilege, but we need to add other forms of participation, formalized and informal, we're no longer small democracies, we're mass democracies. We can't run democratic systems of governance that involve just us, you know, going to the voting booth like once every 5 or 4 years and casting the vote. That just simply doesn't work. It's not fulfilling for us. It's not enough for us. A civic education for all of us. Again, we need a driver's license in order to drive. I'm not quite certain how things got to be that, you know, we don't require the same kind of just very basic certification for someone to run for office. Forgetting messiahs, you know, this is on us. We really need to be much less vulnerable to individuals in our personal lives, and this is difficult, you know. We're all romanced by that person who can solve all of our problems, but we really need to check on it. We need to act like civic adults. Person who promises to magically solve all of our problems is basically, you know, a BS operator. We need to call that. Game the system, news, media, headlines, and economics of attention. We need to be much more aware of how we use or how we reject completely those mechanisms. Reinventing the journalism is very important. That's why I have it highlighted, because these problems have been coming for a long time. I've been studying how some of these issues are generated through the way that we cover them. And my professors did that before me, and then their professors did that before them. So we have the science to do this and be our own agents of civic change, so that we remember that technologies network us, but it is our stories that connect us, identify us, and potentially divide us. So let's use technology to tell the stories that connect us, to remember the stories that divide us, to imagine a better place, and to build, I'll say, bridges. Because a bridge is a wonderful thing. It allows us to cross over while at the same time not losing sight of what it was that divided us in the first place. Thank you very much.